Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our webinar series, Embracing Change. So we've got our dear friend, lovely, incredible woman, Kathleen, who's woken up early in Palm Desert for us to be able to share. And we can see she's ready, rising and shining, all dressed up, ready to roll. Yes, Kathleen?
Indeed, indeed. Hello, Feisal, and hello, everyone.
So Kathleen, the topic today is coming out of the cave, right? I mean, what has that experience been like for the majority of the people? You know, even though something that we've been kind of wanting to talk about, but not wanting to talk about because it's kind of been tiring. But I think we need to kind of maybe do a little deep dive to really understand, you know, what it has been like for many people. Maybe we're, you know, for some of us and different for others. So why don't we just start with, you know, what are you seeing? What have you seen and the impact?
Well, you know, I thought of this as you and I spoke because, you know, it felt, particularly a couple of weeks ago with the vaccine starting to come out, spring on the horizon, that we might actually start seeing a light at the end of the tunnel for collective humanity. Because, you know, since this happened, you know, in an unprecedented way, all of humanity has been subjected to this virus and trying to figure it out and trying to develop a vaccine. And, you know, most of us staying in the cave as requested, right? And look, let's face it, some caves are nicer than others, you know, and some people like caves more than others, right? So this idea that spring is coming, right? The natural stirring, we've had a year of this, you know, what's it like for people? What are their hopes? What are their fears? What's it going to be like? What's the process of coming out of the cave? And I thought it would be useful to actually think about that and to ask everybody to think about it because, you know, some people are rushing out of the caves. Here in America, spring break, they're rushing out of the caves into, you know, mostly the kids, which is great. They want to do that. But we wonder, you know, are we going forward and then are we going to be pushed back? There's a natural exuberance when we see light at the end of the tunnel. We want to rush there. But a lot of people aren't thinking very much about what that means for them and how to optimize that. Right. So these are just thoughts I had, and maybe you could shed a little bit of your thoughts on that.
I mean, look, I think it's, you know, like I've just come back to Hong Kong and the numbers were getting great. And all of a sudden we've got pockets and the government's starting to make very reactive decisions, right? You're seeing Europe going back into a serious lockdown, right? So it's really, there's hope and then it's not. And then there's hope and then there's not, right? And the kids, there's school, well, at least in Asia, school, and then there's not. So it's a really, you know, a pull and a push. And, you know, people are running out of gas, right? When we sat with Jonathan the other day on Chief Empowerment Officer, a lot of really, really rock solid leaders after a year of leading remotely are running out of gas, right?
Yeah, right. And one of the things about the stop and start is humans, we are not good with uncertainty and not being able to measure risk. So that's one of the things you're starting to see people fray around the edges. Well, are we going to come out? And my guess is yes, at some point when everyone is vaccinated, but it's an uneven landscape for the vaccinations. So we actually don't know, but there will be hopefully more freedoms, right? So that we have something to look forward to. But you're right. I think emotionally and mentally, people have had it. Yeah. They, you know, you. One of the important things is being able to draw from the well, yeah. Right? That's how we lead. That's how we do our work. That's how we sustain our families. We draw from the well. The well is starting to run dry for a lot of people. Okay. because some of the emotional and mental thought processes and feeling processes are backing up on people. One, because of the uncertainty. Two, because they've been in for a long time. There hasn't been movement, and human beings, we're movers, right? So what happens is people are not sustaining the well, they're not recharging the well, because it's harder to do that when you're locked in. So that's one of the issues, is how do we sustain the well and sustain ourselves? To me, there's certain principles or skills. And one is really, for me, I'm a meditator, have been for the past 30 years. I get up every morning, no matter what's going on, and that's what I do. Because if I don't go there and get water for the well, I'm going to be dried out, but pretty soon. And so that helps. Also, during that analysis of meditation and the things that have come up through the years during that practice, is looking at what your thoughts are, the nature of your thoughts, and the nature of your feelings. What are you afraid of? What are the things that bother you? Because during these stressful times, they will come up again and again and again. So in terms of optimizing this time or using it wisely, is what are the things that have come out?
Yeah.
What are the things that really bother you? And then correcting that thought process or exploring those feelings. And it's really a mastery technique, isn't it? Because we're either run by our thoughts and our feelings, or we're not. Yeah. If the internal locus of control is there, within reason, remember, this is never 100%. Yeah. But if that internal locus of control comes from deep within that well, and that well is sustained, then all these moving pieces are not in charge. You have to cope with them. You have to deal with them. This is no picnic. Life is, it throws a lot of things at you. But if the locus of control is internal, you're going to have some degree of control.
Okay. So now things come up. You start to recognize them. Maybe you start to see patterns if you're meditating on a regular basis. For some of us, we journal and try to move through it, try to kind of process it. And then of course we seek help, right? In other instances, because you don't want to get stuck in that loop, right? Now, what has been coming up for many people in terms of what you're experiencing when they're doing that process? What's really showing up?
I think what shows up for many people are patterns that have been entrenched for a long time, that while they had more control over the world, they could manage. So these would be relationship patterns. These would be ideas about the world, control over what you perceive as control, how you manage things. Okay. So while everything is cooking along, because look, movement and activity is a great distraction. That's why human beings are built that way. We go out and we conquer, right? We're good. When you're pushed back and you have to conquer from within, you can still do your business and everything, but your cave is smaller. Now, that can be very good, because you get to know your family, you get to know yourself. Those are all positive elements. But it also, if there were problems in relationship before, you're gonna see them more clearly, because there's nowhere to go.
Okay, right? Kathleen.
Right. And also, right. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. But people find ways. Then there's things like anxiety and depression. So I see that a lot with young people. So just sort of going out into the world anyway for some young people, it's always an adjustment and identity issue. So now they're sort of having to look at that. without distraction. So they might feel more anxious about the stability of the world. And I think generally adults are too, sort of like, okay, how do I manage this thing that's unmanageable? Well, most of us look at the situation and say, you know what, we've had hard things before, we'll get through this. And there's a macro sense of not necessarily safety, but resilience in order to deal with things. So that's the good news. But relational issues, also, you know, sometimes things that have not been resolved before, just as even like your purpose of meaning in life, or what's important, what are your real values? I think that's what people have been asking. And this is a good process.
Okay, so you think the timing is okay. It's not that we're really down, we're really not able to move around. So it's good timing in your experience.
Well, it's good timing to do any internal work, because you're pushed back on yourself. Okay. Because your normal ways of distractions are less. So you're more with yourself. That could be a negative or positive experience, or lots of both. But to use that time to say, what is most valuable to me? What have I learned during this year that when I go out back into the world, who am I? How do I optimize my life? And so I tend to look at challenges sort of as very hard things, but what are the human values that get us through and optimize challenges, right? And this is a really good instance. Now, look, you know, it's been fortunate for a lot of people in terms of investments and things, you know, so there's been that. And you know, that's the other piece of this. You know, after the First World War and the pandemic, the Spanish flu, 1920, people were so exuberant. They rushed out, and we had the Roaring 20s. You start to hear this term going around. And I think you're going to start seeing, you know, even L'Oreal Cosmetics was using that. You know, the Roaring 20s, party again. There'll be a natural exuberance. But let's not forget, in 1929, the stock market crashed. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but whenever you have this exuberance, how is it sustainable? How do people, you know, it's almost like a sort of manic-y energy. Well, in the sense of bipolar, you have manic energy and then you have a crash. Anyway, not to get too far into that, I just want people to think about how they're going to come out of the cave, what lessons, what's valuable to them, to optimize these next years. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, but it'd be interesting. I mean, look, whatever you put in the chat, whatever you put in the Q&A, we'd love to hear what has been your experience, positive or negative. I mean, there's no negative, it's all positive anyway. It's you know, whatever shows up, and what has showed up, and how do you feel, you know, with that process, and have you reached out to get help, or have you been able to kind of work it through on your own, right? So while they type in, which let's hope that people are interactive. For me, it's 10:30 at night, and for Kathleen, it's 7:45. So, and we have the rest in the middle. So we've got Europe, we've got Dubai, we've got all over the place. So let's see what comes back. But again, I mean, you know, I'm hearing you, and you know, the word resilience is being used so, you know, so openly, right? And how do you even build that? Like, what does that even mean?
I think resilience to me means the ability to bounce back. Okay. It's like, so you're this person, right? And you have your set of coordinates, and then something happens. So it pushes, you get pushed back. And there's a sense of almost inertia. Okay, where am I? Who am I? So the resilience to me is the ability to straighten up again, push back. So what does that mean? It means physical, you know, the ability to physically sustain a beating, right? Okay. It means, so that's health. It means to have emotional capacity, right? To start understanding how you feel and work with that. So if you feel despair, like I can't do this. So what's the pushback? Hope. So it'll be a human quality that helps you push back.
Okay.
Right? So if the thought process is fearful, which it almost always is at the base of it. So when a person is pushed back by life or an event, they're fearful that they can't push back or get up again. So what's the antidote? They're anxious. So some form of faith in oneself and one's ability, some form of faith in something else, whether that is a spiritual, religious belief system, but that helps you to push back, right? So the opposite of fear is courage. Okay, I can do this. I don't like it, but I have to do it. What are my choices? Give up? Now, ironically, surrendering is the opposite of giving up. Giving up is despair. Surrendering is, you know what? I can't change this virus, but I can think about how I can remain intact. So that resilience quality calls, or that concept calls upon human qualities. And we all have these qualities, but many of them are untested. You know, it's very easy to talk about things when you're a pretty lucky person, not much has happened, you know, you've got a nice cave, but as we like to say, when the rubber hits the road, right, you know, what do you do then? How do you manifest these human qualities? Courage, faith, hope, optimism, all of these things that we talked about in other webinars, they still remain true.
But now, you know, when you're surrounded by people who are spiraling, right? For example, so do you kind of keep your space away from that because that's going to now take you into that space? Or how do you manage it? Because the energetics around you, right, depending on which country you're in and who you're surrounded by, are not easy to ignore, right?
This is an extremely pertinent and difficult issue because, and I've seen it, I work with families all over, and physical issues will come up, but what's coming up more is mental and emotional, right? So that sometimes people will spiral out of control with depression or anxiety or substance abuse, right? And how does the family, you know, you surround the person, you do what you can, it's very hard to maintain a boundary. But if you go to the same mind frame as that person, you're not going to be able to help them at all. And it's going to damage you. So it's a very difficult thing to be with the person, right? But not in the same space as them. So empathy, and this is what therapists do, right? We're trained to sort of be there empathetically and understand it, but keep the rational mind from like, this is you, not me. There's a difference there. And that's really difficult with family members. So holding a boundary and holding that, it's an intellect. And by that, I mean the rational mind. Because what gets triggered is irrational fear. Like, what's going to happen to this person? I'm so worried about them. Take a breath, step back, keep the rational mind and think, okay, what can I actually do to help them? And this is where, you know, most of us in the field have been really busy because we're called upon to serve. Because people themselves, they can hold the space for people, they can love them, but they can't fix it.
Yeah.
If there's substance abuse, some program needs, some treatment needs to be done. If there's massive anxiety, some intervention needs to be made. So again, the silver lining of that is people will get help for things that have been simmering for a long time. This pandemic has pushed people out of their comfort zone over the edge. So they've had to do things they maybe wouldn't have done. The good news about that is if you do it, it's done. It's
So
no longer
let's
lurking in the background, it's there.
So now let's flip gears and look at those who did address or move through what was lurking. What are the beautiful things that you've seen, and the flowers and the spring? I mean, spring is coming, right? And so what are the incredible things that you've seen that people have moved through and that have brought tears in your eyes in terms of seeing that incredible, courage, as you said, because they had hope, they had a knowing, or they surrendered, or they believed that it was all going to be okay. So what are those beautiful experiences that you've seen to kind of...
Well, that's the growth of spring. That's what comes after a long dormant winter. Is if you make it through that, then you get the rewards of spring, the beauty, the clarity, the penny drops, and you realize, I've lived with that fear my whole life. I'm not going to live with it anymore. And you tackle that fear, you confront it, and here you thought it was the worst thing, and actually, when it sees the light of day, it disappears, and you realize, you know what? I'm not afraid anymore. So that quality of courage, that beautiful essence, then makes you appreciate beauty, or having those difficult conversations that with the person you love that says, I can't do this anymore. So it's not angry. It's like, we need to do something. This is how I feel. This is my experience. And that relief of being able to say the truth and having the other person respond, maybe for the first time with their truth, and maybe some real conversations, right? Or in the sake of parents, in the case of parents and children, where the parent is at home and maybe wasn't at home before, and the kids are now having meaningful dialogues. They can count on their parents. Maybe they knew they could, but the parent was super busy. Now realizing, what my child is saying and doing is really is really important. So the flowering of that bond between parent and child, husband and wife, siblings. So look, these are the great rewards of doing the hard work and being resilient. So allow yourself to be the best you can. And this is the time to do it, so that when you go back out in the world, you don't forget about all those things. You take them with you. And maybe, you go back in the world and maybe you don't have as many dinners out, or maybe you decide that dinner, like you adjust. You don't do things in a way, well, I've always done it this way. Oh yeah, well, we're busy maybe you stop and say, okay, do I really want to do this? What do I want?
Not what is expected of me, right? Or what is the norm, or what do other people in my space or my industry do, right? I mean, because it's going to be also, you're going to miss that, right? You're going to miss, I remember when, we were all here when Dubai, we took the last flight out and we had lunch and dinner every day as a family. And when was the last time we did that? Weekends, right? And this was for 4.5 months in a row, right? 5 people having a meal together every day, right? And it's lunch and dinner, right? I mean, it was unbelievable, right?
Right. Because I think this is the way people used to do it.
Yeah.
Right? Human beings lived in a cave for most of humanity's life, existed in a cave with a small tribe, right? We've expanded that, and that's good. That's the way it is. But maybe somewhere along the line, we lost that connectedness. And this pandemic has given us the opportunity to do that again. It's a very rare thing that the collective humanity has that experience. In fact, when it first started happening, people were talking about that, right? This sort of thing hasn't happened in evolution since thousands of years ago, where people were restricted in that way, but it wasn't a restriction to them because that's the way it was. So the values that we can have, we don't have to rush haphazardly into the world now, but a lot of people will. And my concern is that they rush out, they forget everything, and they don't take themselves with them. They're out there in this sort of more manic-y way. They left part of themselves in the cave, so there's a disconnect that happens.
Okay. So you're
right?
thinking, okay, so it's not, they haven't reflected, they haven't taken the choices in advance before they get back into spring. And as a result, right, now we're going to have this disconnect, as you say.
Right. And the disconnect means that, and it's abrupt. So don't forget, it was a long year, but it was only a year. So that's enough time to start habits, but it's not 5 years, and nobody wants 5 years. But what I'm saying is those new habits of having dinner, of talking to your children, talking to your spouse, all those familial relationships,
Yeah.
they're not set hard now. They could
You
be
still feel they're
easily
still,
lost.
okay.
Oh, they could be easily lost, because if there's an exuberant wave, which I suspect, and it's being predicted, that there will be a roaring 20s, I think you're already seeing it. You're seeing the exuberance of the young people as they would. So there were more travelers going through TSA in the States this last weekend than since a year ago. I mean, people are rushing out, mostly young people,
Okay.
because they're more exuberant by nature, because the pent up energy.
Yeah.
So this will be the same in business, it'll be the same in families, but let's hope that we don't lose the connection that we had.
Yeah.
Because that would be like, in a way, schizoid, wouldn't it? Like split, because you would have this intense cave-like experience, and then you would just rush into, and then what would have happened to that? What values are you taking in out there? And if there's all this energy out there, again, it's an external locus of control.
Yeah.
So you come out, right, and you're bleary-eyed, and there's this wave of energy. So do you lose your internal locus of control and lose yourself in that? Or do you go in with wide open eyes? And I think most of our families will, because, we're thoughtful people,
Yeah.
especially business leaders, but there's still going to be a lot of confusion there. And it's important to stay grounded, get your values get your ducks in a row.
Okay. We've got a question here. The pandemic has undoubtedly hit women the hardest, as we see clearly in the data that they were the population most hit by retrenchments, taking the mental and physical load of becoming the teacher, cleaner, parent in the WFH setting. Coming out of the pandemic, how do you foresee women recovering from this burnout?
That is a really, really good question, because all of that is true. And also financially, women have taken, in certain, at least in the States, have lost many of the jobs. They're, all of that. So there's a whole financial effect there. But I think, again, women we're the at-home workhorses. Okay, that's fine. But going forward, how do you step up and say, okay, I need to delegate now because I want to get out there. I don't want to do those roles. Some of them I do, because some of the experiences will be valuable.
Yeah.
But what probably has happened to many women, because our boundaries aren't particularly great to begin with,
Okay.
the herd trampled the boundaries, right? So if during that year one was unable to create good boundaries just because, it's going to be more difficult. You're going to have to reassert boundaries going forward, which are, I have to do this, but I don't have to do that. Or why do I think I have to do this? What is it in me that feels like I have to rescue and make sure everything, maybe people can do a little bit of it themselves.
Yeah.
And so it's a great question because I've seen a lot of that, a lot. And I think I've seen more depression in women, more anxiety in young people, more depression in women because of the overwhelm of the boundaries and not being able to maintain really good ones.
So, I mean, let's step back to, I mean, even before this happened, you're saying boundaries are really a challenge. I mean, how can women, create those boundaries in ways that was not maybe in the past? Like what would you recommend? What are the thought processes that you can maybe help them guide through to reflect, right? And rethink. It's easy to say, yeah, do I want to do this? Do I want to delegate it? But it's easier said than done, right? I mean, what are maybe some specifics?
No, but sometimes things are actually what they are said to be. They are, of course, it's easier said than done, but it needs to be done. So we complicate things. So I think looking at the macro picture of, okay, here's the household, here's my obligations, okay, here's what I have to do. But emotionally, I'm getting pulled in because I think I have to take care of everybody's, anxiety and all the kids. Take a step back. Take a deep breath and look at what you can fix, what you should fix, and what you should just leave alone. It's not your job to fix everybody. This is very difficult for women because emotionally we believe that we have to make sure everybody's okay. But what does that mean? It doesn't mean that they don't feel what they feel. I mean, sometimes we do that with kids. We don't let them work through a discomfort.
Yeah.
Or our husbands, or even our fathers, wait a minute. Are we teaching them resilience or are we teaching them emotional dependence on us?
Yeah.
And we cannot, nor should we, do it all. But I think that's what's evolved in the households for this last year. And women are exhausted, just exhausted. So maybe it's time to reevaluate rationally where the boundaries are. Because what happens is women, we tend to arbitrarily look at them emotionally. We're pulled. Yeah, I know that intellectually, but, our heartstrings. Okay, we need to take a breath. Because you want to be in this for the long haul. This is not a sprint, caring for a family in love. It's a marathon, right? So you need really good boundaries.
I mean,
How the
choosing.
race, yeah.
No, because I was very surprised when we did the talk on homeschooling, and we had a lot of people from the YPO, a lot of the spouses that came, and it was shocking to listen and find out that they were carrying most of the load, and they're both it's dual income families. It's not like it's a single income family, right? But they were still carrying most of the load. We're in 2021. Like, what is going on?
Well, I think, like I said before, in evolution, when we were in our caves and tribal system, the roles were more delineated. The man was the protector outside of the cave, women were too, but women's natural tendency to nurture
Yeah.
was called upon during this pandemic. So if you could get staff or not get staff, or how that was working, before you could delegate a lot more, and you could also feed yourself more. But I felt like during the pandemic, we went back in evolutionary history.
Yeah.
Because men went, what? Okay, I have to do this. So it was left to many of the women. And many of us weren't that used to it, because we had a system in place, right? So look, we can't change what happened. And if you're worn out or, have some anger around that or frustration, need to work through that, figure out the system, the new system, and make it work, which could be a combination of pre-pandemic and what you learned during the pandemic. So it could be a very creative time. So I'm a person who acknowledges frustration and annoyance and anger, yay, but then I want to find a solution, a strategic way of dealing with it. That's the resilience, right? That's what makes us stronger. If you can get up off the floor.
Well, hopefully not too many people are on the floor. They're on the webinar now. So, and they're watching your cat.
I meant that hypothetically.
Okay. All right. That's good. That's good. I'm glad to hear that. We have a clarification. So what else? I mean, what are some of the other lessons or realizations that we could use for day-to-day life? We're out of the cave. We choose not to be disconnected, right? To be pulled apart. We kind of take what we learned, the habits we created, and bring them into that day-to-day, right? Whatever that means, right? And less travel, more meals, whatever it is, right? More connectedness, more gratitude, more loving words, whatever that looks like for each one of us, right? But then what do you think, right? That because each one of us had a different experience, right? How do you think it will play out, right? In terms of, go ahead.
Well, that's the really big question, because as you said, each one of us had a different experience, right? So how is it going to play out? Are some people now gotten used to more isolation? Is it going to be more difficult for them to go back out in the world? Because actually, what's it going to be like? Nobody shook hands. Nobody sat down with strangers or people. How do you even handle physical greeting? It's like hi or social. How do you negotiate this isolation that you've been in for a year and meeting new people and going out? How does that sense of self operate? For many people, they will be anxious because our heads have been filled with don't talk, don't touch anybody, don't touch anything, no handshake, all the human things that we use for interaction can't do that anymore. So how do you even approach a social engagement with people you don't intimately know? I don't think many people are just going to bounce back. I think there'll be an awkwardness that needs to be worked through, a sense of space between human beings that we haven't had to deal with yet, because we've been forced to separate. So, for example, let's say there's a meeting with people you don't know, or a cocktail party, or whatever one might call it. How do you think you'll feel when you do that? Will it be easy? Will you look at the other as a possible disease carrier? I think, this is, no, you laugh, but honestly, this is one of the things I don't think people are going to get over overnight. And we're just starting to talk about that because it hasn't happened yet. So if you're socially distant from the rest of humanity, other than your little bubble in the cave, and you've gotten this notion that they could have a disease, this constellates what people have always been afraid of, that the other is dangerous. That was the way history, evolution was. This is why those definitive roles of, stabbing the beast or getting the, human beings were social, but they were also aware that there was danger. So I think that this pandemic has resurrected that. So think about it, how do we not get caught up in that? So the answer to me is, hey, be aware of what you're really thinking. Try not to see the other human being as the other. But I think that will happen a lot. But is that a question?
Yeah, I mean, for the ones of us who have transformed and we have grown a lot, how do we make sure the people around us don't freak out when they realize we have changed? Usually when we change, we make others feel uncomfortable. How do we deal with that?
Really good question. I think it's in the presentation, right? So if you're defensive about that because people might not like it, you're going to bring that in with you. You're going to be defending this new self. You might have to do that to a certain point, but I think a more healthy attitude is this is the way I am.
But without saying it, right? You don't have to say anything, it just show up.
Right. If somebody questions you and says, well, you're different, you might take that defensively. Take a breath and say, yeah, I've learned some things in this pandemic and this is what I've come up with. It's a more neutral but peaceful way of doing it. You don't have to defend against it. Try to be more graceful about it. Like, hey, we've all hopefully learned something and this is what I learned. It's like I would develop a narrative. And I think for each one of us, right, we're going to have a new narrative going out there. One is what we think of the other. One is what we think of ourselves, and how we're going to now, this new growth, how do we interact with people? So it's all part of the same thing. I think being conscious of what you're thinking and feeling and what you're afraid of is going to help a lot. So let's say, you go into a place and it's kind of the new you and the other person is there. Try to be aware, okay, this is new for me too. I'm okay. And if the other person asks, tell them that. Have a narrative. Think of what it is you want to say. You don't have to defend yourself. You simply say, learned a lot during the pandemic. And this is what I learned. Or if you don't want to go into it, and this is who I am. People learn from each other. And that's another boundary thing. This is who I am. Now, if you say, this is who I am, that's a different thing because you're fearful and you're defending yourself because you feel unsure. But you can be confident in your growth and test it.
No, because the thing is that if you've been a certain way for many, many, many years, and then all of a sudden, like you said, right, if you've been the fixer, if you've been the one always that comes in with a parachute, right, and flips the switch, and all of a sudden now you say, you know what, I'm no longer willing to be the sun in the solar system because I'm getting crisp, right? And I don't mean in a good way crisp, right? And now it's time for me to choose, right? And I'm going to choose differently, right? And it freaks people out.
Right? And it will, because don't forget, a family system is built on everybody having a role. And that role got put in at the beginning of the system, and everybody adapted around it. It's like, for example, when somebody stops using alcohol or drugs or whatever, and then goes back into the family system, they're completely, they're not doing what everybody expects them to do. And in fact, the rest of the family is happy, but the rest of the family is going to do whatever they were doing before. They're not going to know how to change. So that's why it's so difficult for that person. And sometimes they use again, they fall down because they don't know how to change within this family system. The clearest way is to say, I've learned some things, and this is not okay with me, or this is okay with me. And B, it's the tone that people use. The problem is we're all very defensive when we learn a new behavior.
Yeah, but how do you have that conversation with your parents? Right? I mean, if that's the way the family operates, that's what is expected, right? I mean, you can choose, and the actions speak louder than the words. But is it really, how do you have that conversation, or should you even have that conversation?
It depends on whether you should have that conversation. Again, most people, because the new growth is delicate and vulnerable, they will often say things in a way that are alienating.
Yeah, exactly.
This is where basic communication skill. I mean, this is tough stuff. This is not easy. Oh, well, just do this. It's hard. So when people, to set up a conversation, a lot of it has to do with tone.
Okay.
And the rational thought process. If you go in with all your emotions, everybody freezes.
Yeah.
Everybody's, the whole family system, you could see it ripples through. Wow, what do they mean? Oh no, and everybody runs back in the cave. But to be able to stay there and say, look, this is really hard for me. I need you to listen. This is what I'm feeling. And for the other person to actually listen. See, everybody operates around a system, and there's defenses built into that system. So if one changes, the other ones kick in to get the person to do what they're, because that's how the system runs.
Yeah.
So one person changing is going to reverberate, and that person has a big job. It's scary to go in and try to change alone a family system. But learning some basic communication skills, which is taking a breath and trying to rationally, calmly explain and asking for people to listen. And if they don't listen, stopping the conversation and saying, look, I can't have this conversation now. Let's see if we can have it another time when we can actually listen to each other. And again, this is why I work with families on communication skills, because that's the toughest thing to do. It's not even what they're saying, believe it or not.
Yeah.
It's the system. And we're all keyed into hearing what we hear. Uh-oh, I hear that thing in their voice. People react. If you look at, it's not even about the words. It's about the body language and the tone. So ask for, if you want to have a conversation, ask for the space to be able to do that.
Yeah. And I think I left Dubai, and it was tough to have that conversation, right? To be able to have them understand, but maybe it was just me. Actually, probably was. It has nothing to do with them. It was me being in fear of not choosing what I chose before. And they probably would have listened, accepted, and let go. But I think I wasn't ready to have that conversation myself. And thus, I really didn't. I didn't.
Well, that's true, though. It's kind of like learning a new skill, like learning to walk or something. It's tenuous at best. because you're right. We might be convinced it's the right thing to do, but we don't know how to do it. It's a new behavior. So we can't expect other family members to understand it because we don't. But having the conversation, I always think prefacing conversations by what you're really feeling is like, hey, you know what? This is kind of scary for me, but I need to talk about it. And being respectful. See, most of us wait until we're so stressed out that the conversation's not, everybody is tense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
When you run out of gas and, everybody's on the edge, right? And, it's challenging to be centered, not making excuses, but it's challenging to be centered without being charged. And as a result, triggering everybody around, right? And you're probably end up, scared to be labeled as selfish or whatever the word is that may come up, right? And that, when some of us are very, very, keen on harmony, right?
Right, and avoiding conflict.
Yes, right. Those
Right.
are two of my middle names, right? So the thing is that when you are from that space, you're just afraid to trigger and have a response that you don't really want to have. But when you think about it, having that conversation creates so much peace and so much lightness, right? And you feel so free because, I don't know, what do you think?
I think it's important to remember that most families have different behavioral systems, but at the core, most people love each other in their own way.
Yeah.
And most parents want the best they have notions about what the best are. But I think if we remember that it is a loving context, not necessarily that they're going to like it,
Yeah.
but if you keep, but most people, if you can get these communication skills and tenuously put it out there, what you asking for respect and being respectful, people might not agree, but they will think about it. And if the conversation goes well, they're going to try to see what you mean.
Yeah.
However, sometimes people will have conversations within their family and they will attack because they feel vulnerable. Yeah. So they'll lead with an attack. Well, the obvious repercussions are somebody's going to defend themselves and push back on you. Yeah. So we can't lead with an attack and a criticism. We have to lead with a solution, a statement of the truth for that person. That's very different. And we don't do that anymore. The conflict is created because the ground is not solid.
Exactly.
The ground rules of communication are not solid. Yeah. And this is why people will avoid it, because they know, oh God, this is going to be a mess. Why bother?
Yeah. No, I said I shared I was running out of gas, but I didn't share that I'm no longer willing to be the sun in the solar system, which would be a very different conversation.
Right. And see, that is your thought pattern about being the sun and the, they may not understand that. And they may hear that as a sort of criticism that you're like, wait, did we make you the sun? How? So the inherent in that is conflict. But other language about, look, I love you. And there's many things I want to do to help, but these these are the things I don't want to do, and I can't do. So we need to get together and figure out a way that we're going to do this together, because I'm not going to do it. Those are more strategic statements.
Yeah.
Rather than, because family systems, people get defensive really quickly because they don't know what you mean.
Yeah.
Right? So we need to really get the ground rules and strengthen the platform for the communication.
Yeah, but then also there's an understanding, right? There's a departure or an exit with an understanding or with clarity, right? Without feeling of abandonment, right? Because maybe that's what it was felt, that, there's a feeling of abandonment because all of a sudden he wakes up and decides to exit.
Right. Or the feeling of being criticized.
Oh, okay.
See, people, when they hear certain statements, they think the person is blaming them, particularly parents.
Okay.
Or husbands or wives. The defense mechanism is what? Is it my fault? Did I make you do that? You're doing it. I didn't do it. It gets, all of a sudden now we're in this primitive territory. We've lost the plot.
Yeah.
Need to bring people back. It's like, this is not an attack. Here's the reasons I'm saying this. We can work out a different system. I'm not going to do this, but has nothing to do with you. It's taking responsibility for your position. And I think that's really crucial.
So we've got 3-4 minutes left. We've gone a little bit on the sidetrack in terms of communication, but what other elements that you wanted to share that we haven't touched upon? Any questions? Would be great to have some sharing, some questions, any reflections that came as we shared the different elements. Kathleen, what's coming up as we shared all of this? What's coming up and what's resonating? Or
I feel that it's a really hopeful time. I think we've all, learned some valuable lessons. I think this webinar for me is just an idea of being thoughtful about the next phase, be more mindful of it. Like, how will you transition? What are the values you've learned and want to take into your family and into the world? And how do you help your family adjust as well as yourself? So to me, this is not as many solutions as thoughts. And each one of us is going to think be faced with this. And it's exciting and it's optimistic. So let's try to do it the best we can.
And be okay with what is, right? And not come out in fear like you shared, right? When we had that question as to this is the new me, quote unquote, right? Come out without the defensiveness, right? With that reassurance, trusting in life, right? That life is happening for you.
Strength, right?
So the pandemic has been like a buffer from the world, and pop culture's been so comfortable to be away from the judgments of society. How do you deal with the reemerging into that? Wow.
Yeah, that's a really great question, because we're all, again, it's safe in the cave, even if it sort of isn't. But I would recommend thinking about the internal locus of control. Social media society is external, changes every single day. But the internal locus of control is more about who you are and what you value, and being able to stand with that. And so whatever people judge, that's their opinion. It's not a fact. Remember that. Yeah. Judgments are not facts. They are opinions. Holding that internal locus of control means that, okay, yeah, I might not like what you think, but it doesn't make it true. It's your thought. It's your truth. Society is like that because it's so arbitrary. Right? So try to develop your own values, your own good human values, strength, courage, hope, optimism, service to humanity. When you get those intact, you're not going to worry about the external as much.
Beautifully put. Beautifully put. All right. Last few words, Kathleen, before we say goodbye to all the wonderful people who have been.
I would just like to say good luck to us all, and hope I meet you on the highway out of the cave, and you know, it's going to be a new day, and let's optimize the spring.
All right. Amazing. Thank you very much, Kathleen. Thank you for
My pleasure.
showing up after your meditation and freshening up and getting ready to rise and shine. For the rest of us, we're about to head to bed and way past our bedtime, to be very clear. No pressure there, Kathleen.
Yeah, okay.
So thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Kathleen is one of, we're actually going to have 4 women in a row. So Kathleen, you're the upcoming veteran with 30 years of beyond experience in psychotherapy and starting from the integrative path. So you're really, you know, I think the veteran is a woman that's based in Oregon that's coming with us next week, talking about consciousness from birth and how, you know, we come from that point of inception all the way and remembering that again, you know. And then after that, we have a beautiful woman based in London who's going to talk about security, physical security, cybersecurity, in all the different forms. And then we have another woman that's based also in the US that's going to talk about, you know, medicine is within self, the self as the medicine, really. So being able to tap into oneself to really heal. And so, yeah, we've got 4 incredible women in a row. So thank you for starting off that being the first one. And again, thank you everyone for your time. I know we've changed it. Next week it's at again 10 o'clock p.m. my time, because she's based on the West Coast as well. So, all right, thank you everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kathleen.
Thank you, Faisal. Bye-bye. Thank you.